Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm always so excited to jump into these with you, and today is no exception. We're diving into a report that really has me thinking. It's called Consciousness and the Invisible Realm. Are we the cause or the effect? And just that title alone, I mean, it gets right to the heart of things, right? Like, what is the relationship between our minds and, all the stuff that we can't necessarily see or measure with our normal senses?
It is a pretty juicy question, isn't it? And the report itself is just packed with fascinating research and ideas. It really dives deep into this intersection between, hard science and these more like mystical or spiritual concepts.
Yeah, and that's what really grabbed my attention too. We're not just talking about like airy-fairy theories here, but actual research from people like physicist Roger Penrose, biologist Rupert Sheldrake, and even researchers who've studied remote viewing, like at SRI.
Exactly. It's like finally we're starting to bridge this gap between, what we can measure and what we experience internally.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. What are some of the big ideas that this report is exploring? What blew your mind?
One of the things that really struck me is the idea that consciousness might not just be passively observing this unseen realm, but actually shaping it? Like it's not just a one-way street, but more of a dynamic feedback loop.
Okay, so it's like a two-way conversation where our thoughts and beliefs and perceptions are actually influencing the invisible world, and that world is influencing us in turn.
Yeah, exactly. And the report explores a bunch of different theories about how this might actually work. Like one example that really blew my mind is Penrose's idea of quantum consciousness.
Ooh, yeah, I've heard a little about that. Fill me in.
So basically, he suggests that these tiny subatomic interactions happening in our brains, like these quantum processes, could actually be the foundation of consciousness itself. And what's even wilder is the idea that consciousness itself could be shaping reality through observation.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that just by looking at something or observing it, I could be changing it on a fundamental level?
That's the gist of it. It's like the universe exists as this sea of possibilities, right? And it's our observation, our awareness that collapses those possibilities into the reality that we experience.
Okay, my brain is officially starting to melt a little bit here. So it's not just that we're perceiving reality, but we're actually participating in creating it.
That's the essence of Penrose's theory. And the report uses that as a jumping off point to explore even broader ideas, like Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like that idea that there's some kind of collective memory field that we all tap into, right? Like skills or knowledge getting easier to learn over time because others have learned it before.
Precisely. Like we're all interconnected through this invisible web of information and experience. And the report takes it even further, asking, what if our consciousness isn't just influenced by this field, but actively shaping it? Like we're all contributing to this vast cosmic library of knowledge and experience with every thought and action.
That's an amazing image. So if enough people start believing in something or experiencing something, could that actually make it more real? Is that what they're getting at with this group perception threshold?
That's one of the central questions they grapple with, yeah. The idea that if a critical mass of people reaches a certain level of awareness or acceptance about these phenomena, it could change how tangible or persistent they become in our collective reality. But reaching that threshold is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly challenging. We're here to talk about like shifting deeply ingrained beliefs about the nature of reality itself. What are some of the roadblocks they talk about?
Well, for one thing, there's this thing they call scientific stigma and institutional gatekeeping, which basically means scientists who dare to study this stuff, especially within mainstream institutions, often risk their careers and funding and reputation. It's like there's this built-in resistance to anything that challenges the status quo,
It's so frustrating.
punishing curiosity. But even if scientists were free to explore, wouldn't there still be other barriers? Like the very nature of these anomalies themselves. Tell me more about these observer effects and the trickster problem.
Right. So the report actually dedicates a lot of time to talking about how tricky these phenomena can be to study. You've got the observer effect, which is basically the idea that the act of observing something can actually influence its behavior.
So it's like these phenomena are camera shy. The more you try to pin them down, the more they slip away.
Yeah, that's one interpretation.
Yeah.
And it ties into what some researchers call the trickster problem. They've noticed that these phenomena often behave in ways that are unpredictable and kind of defy easy categorization. Like there's an intelligence at play, but it's not one that we fully understand.
That's kind of creepy, isn't it? Like there's something out there testing us, seeing how we'll react. It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing. And the report acknowledges that this trickster element might be one of the reasons why it's so hard to get consistent results in this field. It's like trying to study a creature that changes its form every time you look at it.
That sounds more like a cosmic game of hide and seek than a scientific investigation. But if these phenomena are so slippery, how can we even hope to study them effectively?
That's a great question, and it leads us to the heart of what this report is really about: rethinking our entire approach to understanding consciousness and the invisible realm.
Okay, I'm hooked. I
Yeah.
can't wait to dive into that more in part 2 of this deep dive.
Right, so we know that consciousness could be way more involved in actually shaping reality than we thought, but we've also hit a wall when it comes to like our usual ways of doing science.
Totally. It's like we're trying to catch lightning in a bottle. The report calls this the scientific paradigm problem. What does that even mean?
It basically boils down to this: our current scientific models, they're mostly based on breaking things down into their smallest parts, right? And while that's worked really well for us in a lot of areas, the report suggests that this approach, it might actually be a bad fit when we're talking about something as complex and interconnected as consciousness and this unseen realm.
So it's kind of like trying to understand a rainforest by just looking at individual leaves under a microscope.
Hmm.
You totally miss the bigger picture. The web of relationships, the energy flows, the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And the report says that this reductionist approach might actually be blinding us to the real nature of these phenomena. You see, if consciousness and the unseen realm operate in a way that's more holistic and nonlinear, well, then trying to squeeze them into this reductionist box is going to give us a distorted picture.
Hmm. It makes me wonder if that's why so many studies trying to look at things like telepathy or precognition in a lab.
Yeah.
It's not really giving us clear answers. Like, what if we're trying to isolate something that's meant to be connected?
That's a really good point. And the report goes on to suggest that this problem with our paradigm, it's not just limited to scientific methods, it's also about cultural and psychological biases.
Okay, let's break that down.
Hmm.
What kind of cultural and psychological blocks are we talking about here?
Well, think about it. In a lot of modern societies, there's this deeply rooted belief that the material world is all there is. Anything that can't be measured or quantified by our senses is often dismissed as like superstition or fantasy.
Yeah, it's like we've built this invisible wall between what we consider real and everything else. We're limiting ourselves from exploring the full spectrum of human experience.
The report actually compares it to the shift from thinking the Earth was the center of the universe to realizing that the sun is Quimpeloble. It took a massive change in perspective to get there right. And similarly, it might take a similar leap of faith to really embrace the possibility that consciousness is a fundamental force in the universe.
That's a really powerful analogy. It
Mhm.
makes you realize how much our worldview shapes what we're able to even perceive.
For sure. And this brings us to another important point. We need more collaboration between different fields of study. The report argues that we've compartmentalized knowledge so much that different fields are studying different parts of the same phenomena, but they're not really talking to each other.
So we've got neuroscientists studying the brain, physicists exploring quantum mechanics, psychologists researching altered states of consciousness, but they're all kind of doing their own thing and missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. Think about the breakthroughs we could have if we could just break down those walls and create a more holistic approach to understanding consciousness and how it relates to this unseen realm.
It's like we've all got pieces of a giant puzzle, but no one has the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we even start to bridge those gaps? Especially with all that stigma we talked about earlier.
Well, the report suggests that AI and machine learning could be a key part of the solution. Imagine an AI system that can analyze tons of data from different fields like neuroscience, parapsychology, physics, and then find those subtle patterns and connections that we as humans might miss.
That's a cool idea. Having an AI that can help us see the links between these seemingly separate fields and weave them into something that makes more sense. But what about the whole trickster problem? Wouldn't that still be a hurdle even with AI?
That's a great point, and the report acknowledges that the unpredictable nature of these phenomena, it's definitely a challenge.
Right.
But it also suggests that maybe this trickster element is a sign that we need to totally rethink how we do research.
So instead of trying to force these phenomena into our neat little boxes of how we think reality works, we need to be more humble and open.
Exactly. We need to shift from trying to control and predict to observing and understanding. So instead of trying to recreate these phenomena in a lab setting, what if we focused on creating environments where they're more likely to happen naturally?
So instead of dissecting them, we try to meet them on their own terms observe them in their natural habitat, so to speak.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And the report suggests that this shift might require us to go beyond the traditional scientific method and use an approach that's more nuanced one that takes into account the subjective nature of experience.
Okay, so we need to let go of some control, embrace uncertainty, and be open to the idea that we might not have all the answers. That's a pretty big ask for a scientific community that loves objectivity and being able to repeat experiments.
It is a big ask, but the report argues that this shift is crucial if we want to really grasp consciousness and its connection to the unseen realm.
This is all so fascinating, but I gotta admit, I'm still a bit skeptical. Are there any real-world examples of how this new approach could actually work?
Absolutely. And the report actually points to some really interesting areas where this shift is already starting to happen. One example is this growing field of consciousness research that's using virtual reality and augmented reality.
Oh, wow, that sounds cool. How are they using those technologies to study consciousness?
So researchers are creating these immersive environments that can induce altered states of consciousness that are similar to what people report in mystical experiences, meditation, or even near-death experiences.
So they're basically creating a virtual, unseen realm to see how consciousness behaves in those non-ordinary states.
Exactly. And what's really wild is that they're finding some striking similarities between the subjective reports from these VR experiences and those reported in spontaneous mystical experiences.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It suggests that we might actually be able to use technology to bridge the gap between our everyday reality and these expanded states of awareness.
And that's just one example. The report also talks about using AI to analyze huge data sets of people's personal accounts of anomalous experiences like precognitive dreams or synchronicities.
So instead of just dismissing these anecdotal reports as unreliable or too subjective, they're using them as data to look for patterns and maybe even figure out how these things work.
Exactly. And what they're finding is that even though these experiences are very personal and context dependent, there are these recurring themes and patterns that pop up when you look at a large enough data set.
This is really starting to paint a different picture of how we could study consciousness and the unseen realm in the future. It's like
Yeah.
we're moving from this black and white reductionist view to a full-color, multidimensional understanding.
I like that. And the exciting part is we're really just scratching the surface here.
Well, on that note, let's take a moment to let all of this sink in. When we come back, we'll explore the report's ideas about attracting answers instead of repelling them, and what that could mean for the future of consciousness research. All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating report. We've talked about all the challenges of studying consciousness and the invisible realm. Those limitations with our current scientific models and how we need a more well-rounded interdisciplinary approach. But now let's get to the juicy part. What can we actually do to start unlocking the secrets of this uncharted territory?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And while the report doesn't give us like a step-by-step guide, it does offer some really compelling suggestions for how we might start getting some answers.
I'm all ears laid on me.
So one of the most radical but also kind of obvious suggestions is that we need to start treating consciousness like it's an active player in reality, not just a passive observer. So that means designing experiments that actually acknowledge and work with those observer effects instead of trying to get rid of them.
So instead of seeing the observer as like a contamination or a mistake, we need to embrace the fact that our very presence, our awareness, is shaping the experiment itself.
Exactly. It's a huge shift in perspective that really challenges the foundations of traditional science, you know?
Yeah.
But if consciousness is really intertwined with the fabric of reality, then ignoring its role in our experiments, it's like trying to study the ocean without acknowledging the water.
That's a great way to put it. But how do we actually do that? What would a consciousness-aware experiment even look like?
The report gives a few interesting examples. For instance, imagine an experiment that's looking at telepathy. But instead of trying to force a specific outcome, the researchers create this relaxed and supportive environment where the participants are actually encouraged to just connect with each other's minds, you know?
It's almost like shifting from this prove-it mentality to a let's explore together kind of vibe.
Exactly. And the report suggests that this subtle change in intention and method could make a big difference. We need to approach these phenomena with respect and curiosity, even playfulness. Like they're not just objects to be dissected and analyzed.
That reminds me of those pictures of snowflakes. They're so intricate and fragile that if you try to grab them, they just disappear. But if you just observe them, they reveal their beauty.
I love that analogy. And it actually highlights another important suggestion from the report, the power of collective intention. If one person's consciousness can have an effect on reality, imagine what we could do if we all focused our intentions on a common goal.
Like a worldwide meditation for peace, or a collective effort to create positive change.
Exactly. The report suggests that this kind of collective consciousness, it might be the key to not only unlocking the secrets of the unseen realm, but also creating a better future for humanity.
That's a really powerful and hopeful idea. But if our collective consciousness is that strong, it also makes you think about responsibility, right? Like, what if we're not careful about what we focus our attention on?
That's a really important point, and the report doesn't shy away from it. If our thoughts, beliefs, and intentions are shaping reality, then we need to be even more mindful and compassionate about our impact on the world.
It's like we're leveling up our consciousness, and with that comes a bigger responsibility for how we use that power.
I think you've got it. We're not just along for the ride anymore. We're active participants in creating the reality we experience.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've explored some mind-blowing concepts, challenged old ways of thinking, and even got a glimpse of a future where science and consciousness work together.
It's been a blast exploring these ideas with you. And I hope our listeners are feeling that sense of wonder and possibility too.
For sure. So to all our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this. If our collective consciousness shapes reality, what kind of future do you want to create? What seeds will you plant today to help build a world that's more conscious, more compassionate, and more interconnected?
Keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into these mysteries of consciousness. We're all in this together, co-creating the reality we experience. Who knows what incredible discoveries are waiting for us just around the corner?
Until next time, stay curious, folks.